Go ahead, it's live now, Dr. Said.
نحمده ونصلي على رسوله الكريم أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. We are inshallah beginning our webinar. This is from ICNA, Council for Social Justice. Actually, on this day, we have also already announced a digital human chain around the United Nations against Modi. So Indian Prime Minister Modi will be speaking to UN around this time. And we, as a protest to his policies of Hindutva, his policies of against Indian minorities, against Muslims, against Christians, against Sikhs, what he has been doing with Kashmir since last year, August 5th. So ICNA, Council for Social Justice, has been very active in the United States about protesting all those issues. Basically, we are working for the social justice issues, and there are several issues. For example, this systemic racism is a big issue in America and also in the West. Poverty and hunger and inequality is another our focus area. Unjust immigrant policies is another one. This family breakdown is another one. Islamophobia is another issue. And also this global injustice. So we have been doing since May, we have been doing webinar because in COVID-19, all those activities are now confined to having these type of webinars and these type of Zoom meeting. So we have done on Rohingya, on Kashmir, on rising fascism on India. That's Dr. Ahmadullah Siddiqui did it before, about Uyghur Muslims. And then also especially on the racism, when this Wisconsin, I think that incident happened here, George Floyd incident, the police brutality and killing. So we have done all those demonstrations, a rally all over the country and did several webinars. We're also doing a campaign for free Imam Jamil Al-Amin, is a very prominent Muslim leader here. He has been in jail for the last 20 years and wrong charges and everything has been proved, but still government is not getting him free. So ICNA, Council for Social Justice, basically we are working here the issues of social justice in this society and also at the global level. And then also we are working in the civic engagement area in the empowering Muslim community here. So about getting to involved in the political process, becoming registered voters and getting out of vote campaign. So all those activities we are doing, but basically the purpose is that ultimately we can talk about those policy issues. We should have a space on the table and where we can present the Islamic principles, Islamic solution in a very subtle way, in a policy language. That is our desire, that we like to see those issues, we like to analyze those issues, we like to make a presentation that these injustices going on all over the globe, and especially in the United States, human intellect cannot resolve those human miseries. And we have to have the humanity need divine guidance to resolve those issues. So this Islamic principle, how can we bring it in policy debate, or Islamic solution? Because Islamic solutions not only for Muslim, that's for humanity, and we like to make them it should be included in the policy debate here. So that is a nutshell of that. And ICNA last year also when Modi came here, so ICNA was involved with a partnership for a lot of other organizations, making a huge demonstration in different states, especially in New York and also in Houston. And this year again, and why we are opposing that? Because it's not against India, not against Hindus. No, the basic issue is that his policies, Hindutva policies, is a Nazi policies. It's against humanity, against they want a purified and Hindu state, and it is against the millions Muslims over there, Christian and Sikh. It's like white supremacist here, races here in the United States. And unfortunately, Prime Minister Modi and his party has roots in RSS, and RSS leaders, they aspire from the Hitler and that type of leadership. So those policies, we are against that because they are against humanity, all those policies. And what they have done with Kashmir also, we have done several rallies and webinar and program on that issue also. We were also instrumental in the hearing what last year happened in the Congress. So we, with all other organizations, we partner with that. So basically educating the American public, educating the all public that these policies, these Hindutva policies, how they like to impose this racism and this white supremacy type Brahman supremacy policy over there, that is dangerous for the humanity. That is very much dangerous for humanity, and then especially that area when the Pakistan and India both have nuclear power, and China also has a nuclear power. So it's anything could happen that trigger the nuclear war over there. So for that reason, we are educating a public here that and we are this protesting against Modi and trying to make this digital human chain around United Nations. Around 2,000 people already sign up for this human chain. So that's we like to educate public about these dangerous trends in what is happening in India right now under the BJP government. So we have a good the speakers here. So Brother Waqas Sayyid is also here. He will be speaking also, but he will be inshallah moderating. I saw him. So I will request him to continue, inshallah. Thank you very much.
Jazakallah khair, Dr. Zahid Bukhari. Assalamu alaikum, dear viewers, and I welcome the panelists for today's program. As we know that Prime Minister Narender Modi is speaking at the United Nations due to the COVID-19 situation. He is currently speaking virtually, just like all the other leadership at the United Nations Annual General Assembly. And we would like to keep our discussion towards his policies. And as the title suggests, we are forming a virtual human chain to draw our attention towards the United Nations resolutions against the unjust policies of regarding not just Kashmir, but all Indian minorities. So I'd like to invite the speakers, and I believe Zaid Bey, I think we are going to go with Dr. Zafar Qureshi first, inshallah. Yes, you can unmute yourself. Yeah.
Jazakallah khairan, Brother Zahid and Brother Waqas, for the lovely introductions about ICNA. I really want to thank you and your team, the whole of ICNA, who's been working quite hard, not just on the Kashmir issue, but as you mentioned, the whole Islamic Ummah issue that not only impacts the people of Kashmir, the Bosnia, the Palestine, but even the people of United States within the United States government. Indeed, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is testing us in these times where the Muslims and the minorities are being tested across the globe, whether that's through injustice within the legal system or by specifically targeted them, like the case of Islamophobia. So I also like to take this opportunity to thank you for giving us an opportunity to speak on the Kashmir issue, as well as the policies of the current fascist regime of BJP. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. The 73-year-old international issue of Jammu and Kashmir, which affects over 22 million people across all the territories of Kashmir, is not just about giving human rights to the people of Kashmir or allowing them to decide their future, nor is it a territorial dispute where the occupier is colonizing our resources. But it is a matter of survival for the Muslims of Kashmir, who are being targeted and exterminated by the Indian government. The focus of this dispute has always been of a settler colonization, killing the local Muslim population and replacing them with a Hindu community. This has not just been done by the current fascist BJP government, but has been committed throughout the history. Right from the start of the occupation in 1947, over 250,000 Muslims were killed in Jammu by the Dogra and the Indian forces. Millions were displaced, changing the complete demography of Jammu forever, from a Muslim majority state to a Muslim minority. Even in 1990s, the Pandits of Kashmir were given a safe haven, a healthy economic package, and migrated to India by the government, whereas the Muslims of Jammu and Kashmir continued to be the target and massacred by the Indian forces, hundreds and thousands at a time. We cannot ignore the Gawkadal massacre, the Bijbahara, and hundreds of other massacres that took place in Kashmir, specifically targeting the Muslims in the territory. Kidnapping, imprisonment, torture, custodial killings, molestation, rape, gang rape. Now, these are the everyday atrocities faced by our brothers and sisters in Kashmir. Let us not forget the incident of Kunan Pashpora or the rape case of Asifa and Nilofer. When it comes to the policies of the BJP government, the introduction of NRC and the Citizenship Act in India, the enforcement of the draconian laws such as the Armed Forces Special Powers Act, the unilateral unconstitutional abrogation of the Article 370 and 35A, or the introduction of the domicile and real estate laws in Kashmir are not only in direct violation of the international laws and treaties, as well as against the core foundation of Indian secularism and democracy, but they are an explicit declaration of war on the Muslims and provide a legal backing to the illegal demographic and topographic changes. The domicile rules enacted in Indian-occupied Kashmir will not only immediately allow over 1.5 million existing non-Kashmiris in Kashmir to settle and to take over the land, but the rules have been specifically designed to displace many existing Kashmiris from their own homeland. The agenda of the RSS to exterminate and marginalize the minorities is not new, but it is picking up speed under the fascist BJP regime. And it does not just stop in India. The concept of Akhand Bharat not only includes the areas of Pakistan, Burma, Bhutan, or Nepal, but it stretches from the Straits of Malacca in Kerala to the Mediterranean, reaching to Makkah, where, according to the RSS ideologue and the ex-MP Subramaniam Swamy, they want to convert the Kaaba into a Hindu temple. Brothers, to fulfill this fascist dream of Akhand Bharat, India is building its resources. The current defense budget of India is around $71 billion US, a big chunk of which is being used in occupational forces in the Indian-occupied Kashmir. While the BJP government are changing the demography, taking over the lands of Muslims in Kashmir, rendering the Muslims of India stateless, providing a fast-track citizenship to Hindus and other countries, the same people, under the disguise of democracy and secularism, are muzzling the voices of the innocent people, especially the minorities, not just in Kashmir, but across the India overall, killing thousands of Muslims, burning and looting Muslim houses and businesses. Women from minority communities are being raped and killed. Journalists that speak against the fascist regime are imprisoned or even killed. It is very evident that India now is on the brink of being a failed nation. It is not the Gandhi's India of democracy or secularism, but Modi's fascist India of RSS goons and terrorists. India is creating alliances with the United States, France, actively building and arming its air forces and navy to dominate the Indian Ocean, as well as the South Sea China. It is aligning its strategic objectives with Israel, France, Greece, and other countries, working in partnership at a strategic military level with Australia, Japan, and the United States. And now recently, as you may have heard, they've even found a memorandum of article with the government of United Kingdom to share defense strategies, train the people, as well as share the weaponry. Dear friends, these points vividly portray the India's immediate objective to squeeze the strategic and the power space from its main competitors. It wants to gain a demographic and military predominance in the region while fulfilling the dream of implementing the RSS ideologies on the same lands. These so-called bold moves of India in geopolitics and economics, such as the alienating of the Muslims, legalizing the demographic changes, violating the international treaties, being voted as a temporary member of the Security Council, unfortunately, are not just due to the support from the Western powers, which see India as the counter of growing Chinese powers, but it is due to the hypocrisy, cowardness, and silence of the other nations, especially the Muslim nations. For over the last 73 years, we've heard many speeches. We've seen many reports, resolutions, statements of condemnation against the human rights violations in Jammu, Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir, as well as across the whole of India, supporting the right to self-determination for the people of Kashmir. But unfortunately, all they have been is just that, statements and speeches. It is time that we wake up and ensure practical steps are taken towards a final resolution of Kashmir. Ensure that this Hindutva fascist regime is stopped. The grand Hindu strategy to create an extremist Hindu regime cannot be allowed to progress and must be neutralized. It is a potent threat, and that is not just for the Muslims, but for the rest of the world. It will be used to destabilize and create further conflicts in the region. In these challenging times, the roles and the responsibility of the peace-loving countries are immense, not only to safeguard the lives and the honor of their own people, but also ensure the oppressed people are free and safe. And to counter any such fascist movement that does not respect other races, sees them as inferior, and strategizes to eliminate and overtake them at any cost, we must be united. This unity that we need to achieve can only be achieved when we love and respect each other, appreciate each other's strengths, and help overcome the shortcomings. A clear, consistent policy must be implemented by the international community, which ensures that the human rights are the core fundamental to any deals taking place with India. Looking at the humanitarian crisis in Kashmir, it's going from bad to worse. Lockdowns, blockade on economic activities, education and communication have crippled the Kashmir's economy. Kashmir, which is home to over 250,000 orphans, millions of people are left with no income, people without shelter, widows without any support, medical facilities without any medicine or any other medical equipment have been crippled. The international community, this India's fascist government, has stopped the international community, including the international aid organizations such as Red Cross, Amnesty International, to come into Kashmir and provide any aid, completely violating the Geneva Conventions, the international treaties for safeguarding the people and their rights. As Muslims, my dear brothers and sisters, we must remember, as the Hadith says, believers are like one body in their mutual love and mercy. When one part of our body is in a bad health, the rest of the entire body joins it in a restless and lack of sleep and is busy with its treatment. Leaders and masses alike, especially the Muslim nations, have an obligation towards the wider ummah, especially the ones who are prosecuted around the world. We have witnessed the destruction and genocide of many communities around the world. Today, I plead to each and every one of you, please do not let this happen again in Kashmir. We must come together in stopping the Hindutva menace with the sinister plans for the Muslims of Kashmir and India. They want either to force us to become the Hindus or drive us from our lands or ultimately kill us all. The fascist movement will not stop here. It will spread like a wildfire. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Safar, for your viewpoint on the Kashmir situation, and especially the legal challenges as well as the humanitarian challenges and the extreme challenges that Kashmiris are facing today. Inshallah, we'll move on to our next speaker. If you can get that, yeah. So we have Dr. Ahmadullah Siddiqui, as well as Dr. Muzammil Ayub Thakur from UK. I believe Dr. Thakur will be going next. He's a Kashmiri leader, also from the United Kingdom. Yes, you can unmute yourself.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank everybody for arranging this digital chain around the United Nations. And I'd also want to mention that in many events on Kashmir, a lot of emphasis is given on history, human rights, the United Nations, the current scenario, and of course we always pinpoint the root of it all as Indian occupation. But this is a rare opportunity to go even deeper into the subject of occupation and take a closer look at the occupiers. When we talk about India's illegal occupation of Kashmir, we have to understand that it doesn't vary from one political party to another. There is consensus in India that Kashmir is their integral part. Some may question the human rights violations and others will pursue CBMs, confidence building measures, but ultimately they all agree that the people of Kashmir and the territory belong to India. Which brings me to the current BJP government, headed by Narender Modi, backed by the RSS, a parent organization of the BJP, but it's also a parent organization of other radical groups as well in India. Now, this RSS group, a radical neo-colonial right-wing fascist group that have an expansionist program and aspire to create a pan-Hindu nation under one party as they believe they are the superior race. Now, if that sounds familiar, that's because it is. Not just familiar, but identical to the ideals of Nazi Germany under Adolf Hitler and his cronies. Identical to the extent that the RSS's literature is inspired by Hitler and Nazism and even pays homage to them. The RSS uniform is inspired by them. The RSS salute is inspired by them. And the RSS vision too is inspired by them. Now, even though there is this inspiration, you can see the translation that it has on the general population, and I don't mean just in Kashmir, but even across the mainland of India. Their expansionist vision called Akhand Bharat goes as far as the Middle East, as Zafar said, to the extent that they claim the holy Kaaba in Mecca as their temple, referring to it as Makeshwar Mahadev temple. What can you expect from such people who call the Taj Mahal as Tejo Mahalaya temple? Qutub Minar as Vishnu Stambh temple, and of course the controversial and now demolished Babri Masjid as Ram Janam Bhoomi temple, or as others call it, the Ram Mandir. On a side note, I want to mention that the foundation laying of Ram Mandir happened on the 5th of August 2020, exactly a year after India illegally annexed occupied Jammu and Kashmir. The symbolism is apparent and was purposefully done. There is no coincidence. First, they abolished the Kashmiri identity, and then they laid the foundations of the Hindu identity after destroying the masjid, a Muslim identity. And it is not just identity of those they consider lesser mortals that they want to diminish, but eliminate anyone that does not bow down to them, submit or convert. We've seen numerous mob lynchings all over India, the threats of digging up dead Muslim women and raping them, concentration camps in Assam, and of course, general cold-blooded murder. I remember the case of Tabriz Alam in India, where the 11 accused of tying him up, beating him mercilessly, and then filming it while forcing him to say Jai Shri Ram and Jai Hanuman. He was married for 6 weeks before he died of his injuries. Another Indian Muslim called Afrazul was hacked to death, chopped to pieces by Shambhu Lal Regar while live streaming it all. What's worse is that after he was jailed, he was then bailed by the BJP to campaign for their re-election. Which leads me to the fact that there are terrorist training camps running all over India, and not just for adults. They train them young. They instill this sick ideology and mentality in them early, which can only be described as brainwashing, because I cannot believe that the human race, even Indians, are born with such thoughts. Yet, in Kashmir, we have seen things that cannot be described as human rights violations because that term does no justice to what the people have gone through. War crimes, crimes against humanity, ethnic cleansing, genocide, and now sponsored by the BJP and RSS, a settler colonial project to force demographic change. But this isn't new. Kashmir has been used as a testing ground by India for decades, and that laboratory experiment has now expanded as a policy into India. This is where people like me and Kashmiri Muslims' frustrations come to boil, because we have been warning Indian Muslims and the minorities in India because they saw what happened to us Kashmiris. Yet they've remained silent. And we know that silence is criminal. Now, the arguments that minorities in India, including Muslims, had to be careful for their survival is a weak argument, if not a false argument. And I say that because the people of Kashmir, for more than 70 years, stood firm in the face of oppression, subjugation, and occupation, despite the crushing force of Indian army, the draconian measures of successive governments, and little to no international coverage. There is a modern saying that everything is made in China, but courage is made in Palestine. That same courage resides in every Kashmiri, and yet you see Indian Muslims stand for Palestinian Muslims, support the Uyghurs, condemn the atrocities in Syria, yet for some reason Kashmir is the stumbling block for them, and mostly they turn a blind eye. Now here is the irony. Despite the lack of historic or present support from Indian Muslims, we still unconditionally stand in solidarity with them against the barbarity that they face. The reason I use the term unconditionally because those who lend their support, no matter how big or small, always seem to come with terms and conditions, not just limited to Muslims, but all the Indians that are anti-fascist. They will condemn the human rights violations, yet still maintain the rhetoric that Kashmir is an integral part of India, which goes against the United Nations resolutions. Ultimately, I'm saying I sympathize, empathize, and stand in solidarity with the Muslims of India, including other minorities. But I want to remind them that they have seen the preview for 70 years of what was going to come. And off that preview, let me give you a few case studies, one of which is Kalander, whose legs were amputated and he was force-fed his own flesh. Torture centers in Kashmir, where the victims have talked about how pliers have been used to pull off their nails. Rollers, big rollers that are supposed to roll over roads to flatten it, were used on legs. People's bodies were cut, and the wounds were filled with salt and chili. The victims were thrown into cells with rats who were chewing on them, and these detainees were forced to consume their own urine, and even worse. In a lot of cases, there was a lot of sodomy as well. Another name springs to mind, Nasir. He was a 5-year-old whose left eye was punctured with a needle by the Indian Armed Forces, and then sand was poured into it. We have journalists in Kashmir that have been subjected to draconian measures. Fahad Shah, Ghazi Shibli, Masrat Zahra, Pirzada Ashik, and Gohar Gilani. These are senior journalists who have been forced to go to the police stations, and some have even been charged. Zafar mentioned Kunan Pushpura. Let's talk about Kunan Pushpura for a moment, where an entire village ranging from the ages of 8 to the ages of 80 were raped and gang raped. And we've seen the pellet victims, and one of the youngest pellet victims was Hibba, who was shot in the face and the body with pellets, and now is, I think, temporarily or permanently blinded in one eye, and she was only 18 months old. And I want to talk about only just 2 days ago, my own friend, Babar Qadri, a lawyer, was gunned down in his own home. Nobody is safe under this occupational regime that India has installed, particularly with the RSS and their philosophy. I want to refer to Khushwant Singh, who said in his book that the end of India, called The End of India, and he writes that I may be proved wrong far from becoming Mahan or great. India is going to the dogs, and unless a miracle saves us, the country will break up, and it will not be Pakistan or any other foreign power that will destroy us. India will commit suicide. In 1990, the RSS had over 1 million members, who included, among others, Atal Bihari Vajpayee, former Prime Minister, L.K. Advani, also a former Prime Minister, Murli Manohar Joshi, and Uma Bharati. The last 3 were charged with the destruction of the Babri Masjid on the 6th of December 1992. And Narender Modi presided over the pogrom in Gujarat. The RSS was and is anti-Muslim, anti-Christian, and anti-left. It could be dismissed as a lunatic group as long as it remained in the fringes of mainstream politics, but not anymore. Its political offshoot, the BJP, Bharatiya Janata Party, had only 2 MPs in the Lok Sabha in 1984, but now this party rules the country. I should point out that there are several other Hindu organizations, if not more, militant than the RSS, such as the Shiv Sena, Bajrang Dal, and the Visha Hindu Parishad, to name a few. Now, I want to refer back to Germany for a moment, and Nazi Germany. Germany was a literate nation, and yet it succumbed to the most irrational sort of racial prejudice. India is largely illiterate, and it is much easier to sway the masses by rousing their basest instincts. And if history is repeating itself, with India replacing the British Empire as the new colonial power, then they must remember that eventually the British were thrown out, then crumbled and disintegrated. And I end with this. When the Holocaust happened, the world said never again. When the Rwandan genocide happened, the world said never again. When the people of Srebrenica were ethnically cleansed, the world said never again. And I just hope that we don't see another fascist movement spiral out of control, trying to create this pan-Hindu nation to form this Akhand Bharat where they believe they are the superior race. It is a responsibility of all of us to make sure that history does not repeat itself. And I urge the audience and the world community to engage the civil society to put sanctions and pressure on the Indian government. And right now we have in the United Nations, Narender Modi speaking, and I hope that there can be enough pressure put around your representatives, elected representatives, to make sure that some result is going to be achieved in terms of ending not just the human rights violations in Kashmir, but also what the minorities are facing. There are so many. I mean, if we talk about Gujarat, what happened in Gujarat, we know that even South India are not happy with the rest of India. Assam, Nagaland, Maoists, Khalistan. India is a boiling pot. And I think it was a Chinese think tank that said maybe 10 or 15 years ago that the only way for India to survive is if it breaks into pieces. Now, whether anybody actually wants to see that or not is irrelevant, but we're seeing that the path that the RSS and the BJP are on is the one where they will disintegrate, or at least a civil war can happen. And I pray that we'll be able to end the suffering of not just the people of Kashmir, but also all the minorities and all the Muslims around the world. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum.
Waqas, you need to unmute yourself. Unmute yourself.
Brother Waqas, I cannot hear you. It is my time to start.
Yes, go ahead. Dr. Siddiqui, go ahead.
Okay. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulil Kareem. Thank you, ICNA Council of Social Justice, Brother Dr. Zahid Bukhari, Brother Waqas, Brother Zafar, and Brother Muzammil, Brother Ramiz. It is ironic that at the same time as we have launched our digital human chain and doing this webinar, the Indian Prime Minister, Mr. Modi, is speaking today at the 75th UN General Assembly. He'll definitely mislead the world with false information and phony claims about the state of Indian economy, about the freedom of expression enjoyed by citizens of India, especially the 500 million plus minorities, including about 200 million Dalits, about 240 million Muslims, Sikhs, Christians, Buddhists, and other minorities. If anything, as Mr. Modi speaks to the UN General Assembly, I have no other word for Mr. Modi but to say that he is among the most ruthless and heartless dictators and a fascist leader. The facts speak for themselves. No matter how much the ruling party in India and its allies in the US and the world engage in spreading lies and misleading propaganda. The BJP government has wreaked havoc on pluralism, democracy, and human rights in India since it came into power in 2014. Mr. Modi and his party has destroyed the Indian economy. His first move was demonetization that put the middle class further into poverty. He promised that during the first term, his government will offer 10 million new jobs to vastly unemployed youths in India. That is still a bare promise into the 7th year of grabbing power. India's GDP has shrank by more than 25% and sliding down. Of small to medium-sized businesses and banks have to close down. The economy is so bad that Indian government is putting many of its operations, including its largest enterprise, the Indian Railways, on sale to be bought and run by private sector. The impact is so bad, especially in rural areas and for farmers, that farmers are committing suicide in large numbers. Recently, the government passed a legislation in the parliament to supposedly help the farmers. However, hundreds of thousands of farmers came out to protest this law. The Akali Dal, one of BJP's partners in the government, parted its way and its minister resigned in protest. On the other front, the ruling BJP government had declared to make India a Hindu nation, in which there will be no place for Muslims and other minorities to live and freely practice their religion and cultural traditions. For this, the BJP and its allies, under the auspices of the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, the RSS, have created an army of haters and killers of Muslims, Dalits, and Christians. Hindutva is the underlying ideology of the current ruling party in India. One of the co-founders of RSS, the parent body of BJP, had visited Mussolini in Italy in early 30s. RSS has been using the Nazi symbol of swastika since then. It is naked and pure saffron fascism. I call it saffron fascism because it is founded on the extreme right-wing ideology of supremacy of the upper caste Hindus. The fascists in India have created strong alliances with the Zionists, the far right-wing Christian militias here in the US, and dictators everywhere throughout the world. Before I move further, I must say that we have to keep in mind the difference between Hinduism and Hindutva. As Brother Zahid Bukhari said in the very beginning in his introduction, that we are not against Hinduism, we are not against Hindutva. Hinduism is one, while Hindutva is the ISIS version of Hinduism. Many of my Hindu friends get offended if someone tries to equate Hindutva with Hinduism, and we are not equating that. Hindutva is pure and naked hatred propagated through ruthless lynching of Muslims, Dalits, and Christians. I consider the following acts of the Indian government among the crimes against humanity. Elimination of Article 370 and abolishing the special status accorded to Jammu and Kashmir. Converting the entire valley of the Indian occupied Kashmir into a huge prison guarded by some 900,000 brute Indian army personnel. Brother Muzammil and Brother Zafar have already detailed the atrocities of the Indian occupation, so I won't go into the details. Passing of the Citizenship Amendment Act to exclude Muslims from citizenship rights. It is because of the CAA that about 1.5 million Muslims in the state of Assam have been denied citizenship rights, whereas about 700,000 Hindus who had similarly no evidence or documents to prove their citizenship were put on the citizenship. The center and the various state governments plan to do the same with Muslims all over India. Huge detention camps have been built in many states and more are under construction. I also consider starting the construction of the Ram temple at the site of Babri Masjid a crime against humanity. The foundation was laid down on August 5th this year by Indian Prime Minister Narender Modi. Huge demonstrations against CAA erupted throughout India, in which Muslims as well as non-Muslims protested against the unconstitutional Citizenship Amendment Act for several months throughout major cities in India. The more than 1,000 women of Shaheen Bagh changed the protest into a peaceful anti-government movement. However, Indian police entered into the campuses of 3 of the top 10 Indian universities, the Jamia Millia Islamia, the Jawaharlal Nehru University, and the Aligarh Muslim University. It was the police and the government goons who destroyed buildings, classrooms, libraries, and engaged in large-scale vandalism and brutally attacked the innocent students. Despite proofs and evidence, not a single goon or cop has been punished so far. For 3 days between 23rd and 26th February of this year, the northeast part of the capital was ravaged by gangs and mobs under the patronage and protection of the Delhi police, in which, according to the report recently published by the Delhi Government Minorities Commission, more than 50 people lost their lives, most of them Muslims. More than 1,000 houses, more than 100 shops, all belonging to Muslims, have been burned down. About 30 madrasa schools and about 12 mosques were partially or completely destroyed. Despite complaints being filed against known Maoists, political leaders who instigated the riot, and policemen who supported the rioters, as well as became part of the looters and rioters, not a single criminal has been punished so far. On the other hand, victims and those engaged in relief works have been arrested and booked under the stringent National Security Act. Most recently, they arrested Umar Khalid, a leader from Jawaharlal Nehru University, on the baseless charges and booked him under the National Security Act. What else is fascism? It is when goons and rioters are given high security government protection and victims and innocent people are put behind bars on baseless allegations. The history of India is being rewritten, but not on facts, but on whims and desires to increase hatred. Recently, the UP Uttar Pradesh Chief Minister Yogi Adityanath said in a public statement that Hinduism has no system. Rather, it was the Mughal rulers who cultivated racism in India, which is far from the truth. Contrary to the present impression that Muslims are separatists due to whom the partition of India took place, the truth is that Muslims contributed to the freedom movement and upheld India's composite culture in equal measures, if not more. With two-thirds majority in the Lok Sabha and with arm twisting techniques in the Raj Sabha, the fascist Modi government is passing laws almost every week to weaken the Indian pluralism and democracy. Police and paramilitary forces have already been communalized. Judiciary has been sidelined. The only power that they cannot reckon with is people's power. And that's why we are speaking in this webinar. The courage will begin once they are able to change the Constitution of India and declare it a Hindu state, as BJP has clearly written these two aims in their manifesto. And that's why it is necessary that we all, the Muslims, the Hindus, the Sikhs, the Christians, and all of us who believe in the secular and pluralistic India, come together and fight this menace. Towards the end, I would like to briefly point out some action item. What can we do and should do right here in the US or in the UK, in Europe, or wherever we are? Because we want to strengthen India. We want to make sure that people get their right. I would like to say that it's not we who are saying that the people of Kashmir should get the right to decide their fate. It was the Indian Prime Minister who wrote a letter to the United Nations that he accepts the right of the Kashmiri people to a referendum. And that cannot be denied. We have to work here in the US with the State Department and other local and state government agencies to lobby for the CPC, the Country of Particular Concern designation for India, as recommended by the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom. We have to monitor the Hindutva activities in the US, Canada, UK, and other European countries and the Middle East. We are almost 6 weeks away from the US election. It is our responsibility and civic duty to actively engage with organizations such as ICNA, Council of Social Justice, IMC, and ASPER to ensure and defeat Donald Trump. And at the same time, in many ways, more importantly, to ensure that all the Hindutva candidates who are campaigning for the US Congress must not be elected. We also need to build coalitions and strategic thinking, planning, and action. Time is critically important and we must not waste it. We have to build media relations and use media to disseminate the truth. We have to use social media platforms effectively, frequently, and enormously. We have to identify Hindutva organizations, including businesses, temples, and people in the US who are supporting the fascism and fascist government in India, including Hindu America Foundation, VHP America, Friends of BJP in America that has recently registered as an agent of the ruling Bharatiya Janata Party in India, the RSS, America, and exposing their dirty work and hate mongering. At the same time, the human rights activist in India, helping legal defense team in India, establishing documentation center to collect important and provable documents to use in the court of law. We are in the UN's, dear friends, we are not as disadvantaged brothers and sisters in India and Kashmir. It is our moral responsibility to stand firm with them, make our best efforts, and have hope from God that He will shower His mercy upon us and upon all those who are oppressed. Remember, each one of us can do something. We should not underestimate our power. We should not underestimate ourselves. No matter wherever we are, we have to determine what we can do and do that. Strategic planning and key action are needed to help alleviate the situation of Muslims and minorities in India and Kashmir. But remember what God has said. Indeed, God does not change the fate of a nation if they do not strive to change themselves. أقول قولي هذا أستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Siddiqui, for the very accurate overview of the situation in India. A couple of things I'd like to mention is something has changed in the long journey that Indians have undertaken in the quest for human rights and equality and religious freedom. What has changed in the last 13 months has been a very deliberate and a pre-planned design to undermine the very institutions of democracy in India. We have always seen the law enforcement, the police, and other such institutions becoming a tool in the hands of oppressive segments of the society. But in the last 13 to 14 months, we have now seen a very effective undermining of the very pillars of democracy in India. We have seen how, as you have rightly mentioned, the open perpetrators, those who have proudly admitted publicly of their murders and lynchings against minorities, are not only going scot-free, but being garlanded by the ruling party. We have seen how the Central Bureau of Investigation was surrounded by the police at 3 a.m. to prevent any reports coming out about the major corruption that puts to shame all the corruption cases that came in India in the last 70 years. We have seen how India today has become the most dangerous place for journalists and reporters in the entire world, including places like North Korea and war zones in the Middle East, where over 100 journalists, writers have been killed, have been murdered or assassinated in the last 12 to 13 years. We have seen how the legal system is being abused, as you said, as recently as the Delhi riots, where the victims are now being openly charged with the very crimes that they are suffering. How the politicians who have openly provoked are going scot-free. We are now seeing a draconian new bill in the Parliament of India, the Uniform Civil Code, which is an attempt to erase the identity of all minorities and their religious freedoms and bring them under one uniform civil code, which is nothing but erasure of religious freedoms in India. We have seen how the Supreme Court, how the Education Department, how the Broadcasting Department, how the media, everything has been compromised in the last few years. So this undermining of the very institutions is deeply concerning, because this is going to last for many, many years to come. And bringing this discussion to where we are in the West, we have to keep in mind that it's not just advocacy by advocating our elected representatives to reach out to the Indian government, but also being aware of the presence of the right-wing extremist RSS ideology in our very countries. There are over 1,000 shakas of the RSS in the United States. There are people like Sri Kulkarni who are running for Congress, who are hardcore members or their families, founding members of RSS branches here, right here in the United States. We have to be aware of organizations like HSS, Hindu Swayamsevak Sangh, here in the United States, HAF, Hindu American Foundation, who are working within our interfaith institutions, taking support from a lot of Muslims as being interfaith and faith-based Hindu organizations, but in reality, they belong to the RSS ideology. We have seen how hundreds, if not thousands, of temples have been overtaken, how associations of Hindu-based organizations have been overtaken by RSS and their affiliates here. We have seen how, in the name of advocacy for India, the rights of minorities are being suppressed. Right here, the voices of Dalits, the voices of Indian Christians, Indian Muslims are being suppressed. So this is the struggle that we have to be aware of, and that we have to wholeheartedly take part in and bring awareness among not just the general public, but also within our own Muslim communities, to bring them the awareness that is needed to unitedly confront this menace, this new Islamophobia, this new racism, this new hate group, or which, according to most studies, which is the fastest growing Islamophobia segment within the United States. So with this, I'd like to invite Dr. Zahid Bukhari, the Executive Director of ICNA Council for Social Justice, to conclude the meeting.
Yeah, before concluding, I have actually one or two questions, and then if, although people are making comments on the YouTube and Facebook and other devices which we are running this program. I think Dr. Siddiqui finished his presentation on Quranic ayah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has not changed any nation unless it change itself. So I was thinking that what is the situation in the Indian civil society overall? How they see this
Brother
issue
Ramesh,
of...
can you monitor the sound? Sometimes the sound to hear.
Okay, so what I'm asking that what is the situation in the Indian civil society? How they are reacting about this Hindutva philosophy, about CAA, about NCR, about Kashmir issue? Because what I'm saying that, okay, if we convince the public opinion, the globe and all those things, but still if the Indian civil society they don't have sympathy towards that, at least a major portion of Indian civil society, then probably there could be some chances of some change. Because here also in America, some like Vietnam War, the elite of the government, they were in favor of war, but somehow the civil society or in America, the grassroots level, there was a lot of opposition of that war. So that's my question to Dr. Siddiqui and Muzammal Thakur Sahab and Zafar Qureshi. And by the way, I like to apologize. I think the proper introduction could not happen because it's a very emergency type thing. But inshallah, hopefully, we'll be inviting them again. And as soon as COVID-19 situation is over, we like these are our two young, mashallah, very passionate speaker. We would love to have them here in USA and tour the different cities. Inshallah ta'ala, we'll do that. So this is my question, Dr. Siddiqui and Muzammal Thakur Sahab and Zafar Qureshi Sahab. That what is the situation in the reaction in the Indian civil society? Dr. Ahmadullah Sahab, did you listen to the question, please? You are mute, I think. No. So anybody, if you like to address, not necessary.
Jazakallah khairan. Zahid, a very pertinent question. I think it's a very important one. The current crisis, we know, as Muzammal said earlier, the Indian occupied Kashmir has been occupied for the last 74 years. But at this point, I think it's very important that the Indian civil societies come together and raise the voices about the reality of the Indian government, the atrocities that have been committed. We know there are some of the Indian civil societies, like the Women's Indian Society, that tried to go into Kashmir and get a report on what was happening under the current government, as well as across India. They've tried to compile reports that highlight atrocities against the minorities. We need to target these civil societies and provide them with the support so that the reality from the ground that's happening in India under this current regime and across are highlighted onto the international platform, so the world actually knows what is happening to the Indian minorities. The current government is trying its best to curb every voice that comes from India, especially from Kashmir, whether that is through curbing of the journalism, the news, or the civil society. Recently, we all heard how the Amnesty International India's branch was attacked and then closed, and they were asked to take away the reports. Now, these are the things that we need to highlight on the international community. These are the things we need to highlight in the United Nations, in the European parliaments. We need to work with these civil societies, try to get as much evidential reporting from India and disseminate that across the globe.
Zahid Saab, I think you're muted, but I'll also interject a couple of points. I just want to give two names, Umar Khalid and Sharjeel Imam. So you can see the circumstances that they're in now, those that speak up against the regime, the Indian regime, the brutal RSS and the illegal laws, the CAA, NRC laws that have been passed, and the protests that have happened in JNU. We've seen the kind of clampdown that the Indian government have done against the civilian population, but specifically the civil society, the students, and also the media, the kind of media ghetto. If anybody really watches the Indian media, they know that the type of media that exists now is not the one that reflects the BBC or the CNN. This Republic channel has set a certain benchmark for all the other channels in India to shout as loud as they can, to be a mouthpiece of the government, to accuse people, to become judge, jury, and executioner, and that's a problem. So the civil society in India, what can they possibly say? They get locked up as well. They suffer the same consequences as anybody would in Nazi Germany or in any type of organization or country that has a fascist rule. So that said, it's difficult to say that what they can do. I mean, we've even heard of journalists that have returned their awards in protest against the Modi government. But the problem is that the Modi government came back again. I mean, they were re-elected, and this time with a landslide victory. So we also need to measure the feelings inside India and who exactly are voting the BJP into power. And not that I believe that the democratic process in India is legitimate in any shape or form, but there is a sense that the BJP and the RSS have got the pulse of the nation. And you have to remember that the Muslims and the minorities are still a minority if you consider the kind of support that the BJP and the RSS have in India. It's clearly much more than the minorities put together. So they have in Kashmir you say nabzarat, which means to grab the pulse of the nation, and they have that. They know exactly what to say and what to do to motivate the population to keep them in power. And the civil society, they may have started talking against the government. They may have done some work to counteract and protest against the criminality of the government. But even they've seen that the kind of clampdowns that BJP have done on the civilian population, the civil society, lawyers, different fraternities, they can't survive. And I think that it's situations like this where there has to be some kind of intervention. If you remember, obviously, of course, people remember Afghanistan and Iraq and all these other nations where democracy needs to be installed. So I think that a little bit of democracy needs to be installed in India as well.
Ahmadullah bhai. Ahmadullah bhai, are you able to? Yeah.
Yes, yes.
So if I may add to my question, that how like some suggestion, if you have any, how the minorities of India could be organized in that way that their weight could be felt, because right now probably BJP government was instrumental to make Muslim numbers a weightless number in the political process. So and any strategy if you are suggesting, because you have very good analysis of the Indian society also, and you gave very valuable suggestion for here, the alliance building and working in the American, and we are trying to do that on those issues. But if any suggestion for the minorities organizing or putting some weight in India.
I think that it's important to trying, because we don't have any option. The government has a plan, they have a plan, and whatever they can do, whatever, I mean, they are trying to neutralize every step that are being taken by different groups. There are a lot of activists, Muslims. Now there are a lot of social channels, YouTube channels like The Wire and others that are effectively bringing in the forefront the atrocities of the government. Recently, Supreme Court asked the Sudarshan TV that has launched a campaign against young Muslims who have been elected to the civil to stop jihad, so-called, against these young Muslims who have been elected. The government of India has filed a brief to the Supreme Court that there be any way to control the social media outlets. That is an indication that pretty soon they are going to make a law to make it illegal and punishable crime for all these social media outlets. But what I am saying is that we have no other option, and the more we are, better we are going to be effective. Unfortunately, still in India, especially among Muslims, we and infighting. This is not the time for that. We have to realize that we are facing a catastrophic future if we don't come together and we don't take united action. There are Dalits who are very active. There are Sikhs who have offered support to the CSJ, and there are very active groups and people. Prashant Bhushan, the Supreme Court advocate, Harsh Mandar, and people like that who are willing to help Muslims and help them in achieve what they want to achieve. But as I said in my previous webinar, we have to fight a long battle. We have to prepare ourselves for it, because the fascists have determined their steps in a very measured way, in a very calculated way. They have neutralized most of the Middle East governments. They are trying to neutralize opinion, the British public opinion. And that's why there are people in British Parliament, there are people in US Congress like Krishnamurti, there are people who want to come into US Congress. They are trying, because the plan of the fascist government in India is to neutralize the public opinion against the fascism, rise of fascism in India worldwide. I have said, and I am saying it again here, that here in the US as well as in India, we have to come together. The more we are together, the better our strength will be. And then we have to make strategic plans. More than speeches. You see some of the fiery speeches, but behind the scene, they are still making deals with the Indian government. That's work. We have to expose the hypocrites among us. The Prophet ﷺ had exposed the Muslim ranks in Medina. This is the time that we have to be very clear. Who are the hypocrites and who are the sincere people fighting the cause? The time has gone. I am an Indian, and I am saying it loud and clear that we, the Indian Muslim, have to come in the forefront and say to the fascists that yes, Kashmir is an occupied land. The people of Kashmir should get the right to determine their fate. Why we are hiding this? This is the time that we have to come out clear and loud. They are doing what they have to do. We have to do what we have to do.
Thank you very much, Dr. Siddiqui. Any comments from the England political environment, like the Indian, England, UK political environment? What is the behavior of the elites, like those who are the member of the upper chambers, both House of Lords and House of Commons, and then in the media, those type of sectors? How you feel that, is there any like change happening, or if change happening in a positive way or in a negative way, or what is your comments on both of, one by one? I think you can say that what is the overall political, socio-political environment vis-a-vis state of India, what is happening over there in the Kashmir situation?
In the UK, the problem is that people still see India as a tourist destination, as a holiday destination with culture and identity and history and the way that India have sold it. And the problem is that to change that ideology and that mindset of the people is quite difficult because it's ingrained in them. They've known this for a long time. India have incrementally, skillfully, deceitfully become this right-wing fascist movement and government. So it's really a struggle to change that manipulation. But at the same time, we do, and that may be true for the common man, but in the in the parliamentary in the parliament and with members of parliament and the House of Lords, I mean, these are educated people. They're clearly in positions of power for a reason. So when we do engage them, they are aware of the situation. But again, you have to remember, as elected representatives, most of these MPs are elected representatives. So therefore, they also have to consider what their constituency members think. So we have certain areas where a particular member of parliament may not be as sensitive towards the plight of the Indian Muslims or the Kashmiris, but that's because his constituents are predominantly Hindu, particularly Kashmiri Pandits, Kashmiri Hindus, or those that have been backed by the Indian government and the BJP and the RSS and various other organizations. I think Siddiqui Saab mentioned that, there is a BJP and a VHP and an RSS group that have launched in the United States that declare themselves as a branch, as an offshoot of the BJP. And the same way, there are those groups here as well in the United Kingdom. So nothing is impossible. It's just that it takes more time and a little bit more effort to make sure that we can counteract. And I think most of the time, this is not just speaking as a Kashmiri, but generally as activists or people that work in this kind of area of expertise, that we are very reactionary as opposed to proactive. We wait until a certain event happens or passes, and then we decide to figure out what can we do to clean up this mess. And I don't think that is a particularly useful strategy. And I'm not disparaging the people that have worked before us and laid the foundations for us. But the problem is that times have changed, continents have shifted, and we're still using methodologies and strategies from years back, whereas opponents and people that are building new nations and new philosophies are light years ahead of us, and we're still playing catch up. And I think that's something that we need to do. We need to get some of the best minds around to strategize and give us new implementations and philosophies and ideas and marketing and the different tools that are required to counteract such abominable kind of thought processes and philosophies, such as the RSS and the BJP. But it's there. I mean, there is a lot of pressure that is being put in the British parliaments and different organizations, but it's an effort, because at the same time, one thing that we always forget is no matter how much work we're doing, we never really recognize that there is going to be a counteraction. I mean, what was it? Newton's theory that for every action there is an equal and opposite reaction. So we must recognize that there is always going to be pushback, and we must always prepare for that. And that's one thing that we usually lack. I can't speak for everybody, but at least in my case, that that sense of being able to foresee circumstances is a problem. So we need to be able to engage other people that have success. I mean, maybe on a side note, but we should engage other nations that have successfully defeated, right-wing fascist. Even for example, South Africa, they defeated the apartheid. They succeeded. Bosnia, Kosovo, the people of Srebrenica. So I mean, we should learn from them, engage them. And it's not necessary that we can duplicate their models and their philosophies and their strategies, but at least we can learn from them. I mean, the foundations have been laid from these people. People have laid their lives to give us these foundations. So the least that we can do is learn from them.
Mm-hmm. So first of all, you want to say something?
And Jazakallah khair. And I think, it was well presented by Siddiq Saab as well as Muzammil. I think one of the things that we've noticed in UK and Europe-wise in terms of the Indian Muslim narrative is that we're actually lacking that Indian Muslim narrative. There's a lack of activism from the Indian Muslims in UK as well as the whole of Europe to actively engage in the political or diplomatic spheres and present their case, especially the atrocities that are happening with the minorities in India. I think there's a sense of feeling between or there used to be, a feeling within the Indian Muslim community that, okay, whatever is happening in Kashmir isn't going to touch us. We don't need to worry about that. There was a lack of an engagement in the political sphere. I think at this point, there has to be a realization among the Indian Muslim diaspora that this is an issue which is going to impact them irrespective whether they're living in United Kingdom, in Europe, or United States. And unless they are united, proactive in presenting the voices and the atrocities of what's happening in India against the minorities, we may not be able to successfully represent it on the levels that we need it to be. As agreed, we need to learn from other nations who have successfully raised that voice, highlighted the oppression, and successfully gained the right of self-determination, their civil liberties. But that can only be achieved when the Indian Muslims unite and be proactive on every level, rather than taking a backseat and letting those people take that front seat, which are completely misrepresenting what's happening in India.
Okay, we thought that in the previous our webinars, sometime people also make comments and question. But today, more than we are receiving mostly the good comments, appreciating the program from Kashmir, from I think from Bangladesh, from Indonesia, from UK, from USA. So in different places, people are watching. So they are just making comments. So until now, I didn't receive. I'm looking at, I'm reading all those, but they are just appreciating this webinar and all those this feeling which we are is presenting here. So one last, I think the question, and then inshallah we will finish that. What is happening that before that in the West, probably in the USA, when we had this anything related to Islamophobia. So we had a particular, these are some Christian organization, some Israeli organization, they are doing Islamophobia. Even our Muslim community leadership, they didn't have, those who are non-subcontinent, they don't have that full realization that what Hindutva inspired organization in the West, especially in the USA and probably in Europe and England also, now they are becoming the new champion of Islamophobia. They are against immigrants, they are against Islam, they are against Muslims, they are against, so, and they are aligning themselves with the wide right-wing supremacist organization here, the Israeli lobby here. So there is a need to, as Muzammil Thakur Sahab was saying, that instead of reactionary, I think we should have some proactive behavior and exposing them instead of whatever allegation they are putting us and we are just making clarification. No, there is a need to expose them that these Hindutva organization here, they are to some extent exploiting the land of the laws of land here as a non-profit. I'm talking about the US, but they are exploiting them. They are supporting the lynching of Muslims over there, means collecting funds from here. They are supporting all those means Brahman supremacy or all those activities over there. So we have to expose them, but because otherwise they are having their impact in the electoral politics, in the White House, in all IT and all those things, and especially culturally, they are very much acceptable here. So I think that is also a front where, as Dr. Siddiqui was saying, we have to strategize, we have to make documentation and then publish. So we are planning to do something when we are talking another thing. Anything in Europe or England on those framework, any thought about over there, what is happening?
You're absolutely right. I think whatever's happening in the United States, there is a reflection in the United Kingdom as well that Islamophobia now is being pushed by the Hindutva brigade. And in fact, similarly how anti-Semitism was used as an excuse for Islamophobia, there is also this Hinduphobia, that is this new term called Hinduphobia that has arisen. I don't know if it exists in the United States, but at least in Europe, the term Hinduphobia is on the rise. So anytime a Kashmiri or somebody criticizes the Indian government, or they, shed light on the fascist nature of the BJP or the RSS, or, just generally exposing the crimes of the Indian state, immediately those people are labeled as being Hindu-phobic. So, yeah, it is a problem. And I think that if we don't counteract this now, we're going to have a problem in the future. So we need to prepare to be able to eliminate this kind of rhetoric and this false narrative that they're trying to build. And you have to remember, with a 1.3 billion population, and a global, a rising power, at least economic power, geostrategic. So they will be able to push that agenda eventually to the parliamentarians and through governments to say that, we need to stop the rise of Hindu phobia. And we've already seen a few years ago how the Indian Home Minister came to the United Kingdom, and before one of the conditions of signing a post-Brexit deal between the United Kingdom and India was to stop the protests that happen outside the Indian High Commission, the Indian Embassy, in regards to Kashmir and Khalistan. Otherwise, that deal would be off the table. So, Hindu phobia, this so-called notion of Hindu phobia, is on the rise, and they are trying to implement it through power corridors. So we do need to prepare, and I think we need to kind of really look at what's happening in the shadows as well. I mean, whatever's overt is the obvious, and that's it's easy to counter. But we also need to see what's happening covertly as well.
Okay. Any final thought from any of the speaker? And otherwise, we will, inshallah, end this webinar. Okay. So I know I'm really grateful and thankful on behalf of ICNA. Yes, Dr. Siddiq. Yes.
Yeah, I was muted, so.
Sure, please go ahead.
Let me briefly reiterate.
Just 1 minute. I think it's better to. Yes, Dr. Siddiqui.
Yeah, I'm saying that. Can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you. Carry on.
What happened?
But I think we use the word, but probably we don't understand. Either we don't understand or we don't engage in proactive measures.
Mm-hmm.
Islamophobia has become mainstream all over the world, long time, whether we realize it or not. And we have also contributed towards this phenomena by not realizing the extent of money that has been spent in the US alone and in European countries and in India by forces that hate Islam and Muslims. Our investment in media is almost negligible. You said that we should do this and that and that. Where? To which forum? The mainstream media, do we have any understanding, relationship, investment, contribution? When I came here in 1981 to the United States, I found that many Hindu students from India, they were sponsored by big Indian businesses to come to the United States and work as intern in major US media outlets. That has been going on for what, 40 years? And that when they worked, they had established a relationship with them, with those media houses, with those newspapers, Chicago Tribune, Los Angeles Times, Washington Post, you name it, and you will find somebody from India is working there. Whereas our investment is almost negligible. So, I mean, it's never too late to start, but we have to understand that media are expensive. If you want to make inroads into mainstream media, you have to invest. You have to establish key relationship. Up to this time, what I can say that our response to the rising fascism in India, to the Islamophobia, has been mostly reactive. And that is not going to help us anymore. We can do and satisfy ourselves that we have done this webinar, we are doing this and that. That's good. I'm not undermining or underestimating the power of what we are doing. But at the same time, I'm saying that we have entered into a critical situation, an emergency situation, a disastrous situation. The flood water is flowing above our heads. So if we want to wake up, that's good. If we will not wake up, we will be drowned. So that's the situation. I mean, let's make some concrete steps. Let's take some concrete, proactive, far-sighted steps to make inroads or to establish a positive relationship with the Western media. I have seen it firsthand, even in United Kingdom, when the media went against the Islamic Foundation, how difficult it was to provide a rebuttal, to provide a counterpoint of view. Because, I mean, that's what I have taught for about 30 years in a major US university, media and public relations. And the very definition of public relation is to establish a mutually beneficial relationship. It is what we are able to give, we are going to reap. So, I mean, I don't want to prolong this discourse, but you understand, Dr. Zahid Bukhari, what I am saying. I have been saying that at ICNA convention for the last 25 years. That's what I am saying to my friends who are listening to us in Bangladesh or in South Africa or in India or in UK or anywhere, that don't underestimate yourself. Do something that you can be counted by the media. 95% or more than 95% of the Indian media have become simply a propaganda tool of the fascist government. We should not wait for that moment when we have to sadly witness the same thing in Europe and in America. There is still time. There is still time, my friends. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we have 1 hour and 30 minutes. We have, mashallah, very passionate and very analytical analysis of this Modi regime at the time of when Modi is making, he already probably made his presentation to UN General Assembly. So as I mentioned that ICNA Council for Social Justice started with this digital human chain, and around, as I mentioned, 2,000 people, they sign up, and we had this webinar. So I really thankful to all of our participants, the panel, the panelists, Dr. Ahmed Siddiqui, Muzammil Thakur, Zafar Qureshi, Waqas Sayyid for moderating, Ramiz Sayyid for providing all those technical information. So on behalf of ICNA Council for Social Justice, we are thankful to whoever will be watching now and who will be watching afterward. So really thank you very much. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Wal asr innal insana lafi khusr illa allazina amanu wa amilu salihat wa tawasaw bil haqqi wa tawasaw bis sabr. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.